Okay, so I'm going to speak to you today about why we need to redefine resilience and actually how we can build courage and connection to create high impact teams in times of change. So I'm going to start with a question. What does resilience look like for you and your team in times of change? Now, often when I ask this question, people say things like coping, because I think a lot of people confuse that with resilience. Or, some people say thriving, which is always great to hear. Or often I hear things like, oh, we're head down, as if they kind of want to put everything out of their minds because the change is really overwhelming. Sometimes it's anxious. Sometimes I hear there's a lot of silos appearing in teams where communication is starting to really break down, where there might be blaming or shaming happening, where mistakes are being made. Or often there's risk aversion, because right now, actually, in times of uncertainty, we crave that stability. But what am I describing here? It's not really resilience. Actually, what I'm describing is what we call the uncertainty tax. And this is a very high tax that we pay in times of change when we're finding the uncertainty to be really overwhelming. Now, we know that resilience is a really important trait to have. But the challenge we have is that there is a profound misunderstanding about how to truly cultivate resilience in teams in times of change. And I would say within individuals as well. Right now, we're living through what I call the resilience paradox. And there are 5 things that are feeding that resilience paradox. The first thing that is feeding the resilience paradox is that we're actually facing more adversity than we ever have done beforehand. 52% of UK employees report feeling burnt out at work. 8 in 10 employees say they've experienced more workplace change in the last 2 years than ever before. Now, you would think, okay, so with all the challenges, that should help them to develop their resilience. But actually, that's not what we're seeing at all. In fact, it's becoming too overwhelming. As a result, the second thing that's feeding this resilience paradox is that we're soothing ourselves with comfort in the short term rather than building long-term resilience. More than one in 3 employees say they avoid stress, and actually they fill their time with distraction or procrastination. The average American watches 7 hours of screen time outside of work. Where is that time? The comfort culture is also spilling over into the workplace. We're avoiding tough conversations a lot more. We're choosing ease over growth. And every time we do this, we diminish our capacity to be resilient. The third thing that is feeding that resilience paradox is, as a result of the first 2 things I've described, we aren't doing the right kind of hard. We actually need hard in order to flex that resilience muscle. That's not the only way to achieve it, but that is one of the ways. And as a result of that, what we're seeing in organizations is there is a return to helicopter management. That's over-controlling management practices. We're seeing command and control leadership having an enormous resurgence right now. Something that was the leadership paradigm of the 80s and 90s is now coming back in full force. And where managers and leaders aren't seeing their teams engaged, motivated, productive, that's why they're starting to come back to these styles of leadership and management, because it's a reaction to this resilience paradox that we find ourselves in. The fourth thing that is feeding the resilience paradox is that resilience is fundamentally misunderstood. We still think in the workplace often that resilience is an individual trait. You either have it or you don't. A lot of the training that happens is to cultivate resilience in individuals. But all of the evidence points to resilience being a team sport. People quit unsafe teams and a poor manager relationship. They're not leaving because of hard work. And the fifth and final thing that is feeding the resilience paradox is that resilience is not just about bouncing back. Yes, bouncing back is a part of it. But actually, if you look at what actually feeds resilience, what it takes to be resilient, and what the outcome of resilient is, they are 3 different distinct things. The inputs of what we need to create team resilience are things like courage, connection, compassion. Similarly, I would say for individuals as well. And then the middle bit, when we're actually being resilient, when we're actually dealing with something adverse, something challenging, that's where it gets messy and human. I call it sitting in the messy human middle, because that's what it feels like, because it's hard and it's challenging and we're not sure how we're going to manage it. And that can be really difficult. And yes, the outcome of resilience can look like strength and grit and determination. And yes, those things can be a part of the inputs as well. But primarily, most of the inputs are where we are at our most human. They are the soft skills that we need to cultivate in ourselves and in our teams. And that is why I believe we need to redefine what resilience is and how we cultivate that in our teams so that they can thrive in times of change, because we're living in an era of relentless change. Now, I'm not just somebody who sits in front of you as a student of resilience and positive psychology, as a positive psychology coach, as a high performance coach, or even as a chief heart officer, or even as a former FTSE 100 senior leader who led transformation and teams at such a global level over the years, 20 years, in fact. Now, I sit in front of you today as a human being who has gone through some of the most challenging times that any of us would face, and who has learned the very hard way what true resilience really is. Because you see, misunderstanding resilience isn't just a wellness issue. I know from experience, it's actually a truly performance risk. Teams with high trust are 2.6 times more likely to be more resilient during periods of stress and change. That is an incredible performance advantage. 90% of top performing teams score high in emotional intelligence, which predicts how well they bounce back from strength. Again, human skills. And resilient teams are 52% less likely to experience burnout and 31% more likely to stay engaged during periods of high uncertainty. These are your competitive advantage, and cultivating resilience in your teams is absolutely what we need to be able to get better at doing from now on. I want to share with you now my own story, my own experience of what it was like building resilience from the inside out, as a human being, as a leader of teams, and as a chief heart officer. Now, when I started my career back in the 1990s, and I'm definitely dating myself by telling you this, but I won't reveal my age, though I think you can probably work it out. My role models were Gordon Gekko from Wall Street and, Melanie Griffiths from Working Girl. I was all shoulder pads and a stiff cup of coffee. When I started in the workplace, the things that we were most worried about was the Millennium Y2K bug. And we carried Nokia brick phones and we could still book meeting rooms on paper. Felt like a simpler time. And we absolutely had command and control leadership. That was absolutely in fashion then. We were told to push through. We were told to push people out of the way. We were told to have the sharp elbows. We were told to just get on with it and to pull the all-nighters. And we weren't just encouraged, we were rewarded for it. And that was absolutely the world that we came up in the 90s, in the early 2000s. And I can still remember being given that advice by senior leaders that I worked with in those organizations, which was just get on with it and keep going, no matter how hard it is. And yes, I progressed through the ranks and I was really good technically at my job. And so I kept getting promoted into management positions, into leadership positions. And I wasn't prepared for any of them. I had really low levels of EQ. And so I knew how to do the job, but I didn't know how to manage or to lead. And that really weighed on me. And that really caused a lot of stress in me. And I can remember I was always pushing for the next thing. What's the next thing? What can I get? What can I do? How can I get that promotion? How can I do this? And so fast forwarding to my career now in 2014, I suddenly started to become really unwell. I went to see the doctor and she said, look, you've got to have a surgery in the next couple of weeks. And you're going to need to take a couple of weeks off. And I was like, rolling my eyes. Hey, I'm too important to take 2 weeks off, yeah? I went in to see my manager and I said, the doctor said I need to take 2 weeks off. I won't need it. I'll be back in a week. I'll probably be logging on after a couple of days, checking emails, because I'm tough. I didn't come back to work after a week. In fact, I almost never came back to work at all because that straightforward surgery went wrong. During the surgery, the surgeon cut my bowel. She put a stitch in it and sent me home and said everything would be okay. It wasn't. Within 48 hours, I was being wheeled back into A&E, being told by another surgeon that I only had a few hours left to live. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I was only in my 30s. And I remember having this horrible realization that I had prioritized all of the wrong things in my life. I'd prioritized the promotions, the pay rises, the money, the house, the car. And when everything was about to be taken away from me, none of those things mattered. And I realized that I'd sacrificed the most important thing in my life, and that was love. And I can remember turning to my dad and saying, I never even got the chance to fall in love. I never even got the chance to have someone love me back. I never got the chance to get married or to have children. And it felt so unfair. I felt so afraid and so isolated. Now, of course, I survived that, and many people don't survive having peritonitis. When it's left for as long as I had it for, it's fatal. So I was very lucky to make it through, and even luckier to be able to rebuild my life and be able to sit in front of you today and be able to share with you this story. Now, I want to be able to tell you that when I came out of the hospital, that's the moment I changed my life and I became a chief heart officer. It wasn't. This isn't a Hollywood movie. I went back and did all the exact same things again. I did not have the toolkit to know how to make any of these changes. Everyone around me kept saying, you need to be resilient. You need to just push through. You need to be tough. Forget about it. It's in the past. Move forward with your life. You have got a second chance in life, Sharon. You need to be grateful. And I was grateful. And I did have a second chance in life. And I really did try to be tough. But it felt like for every moment, every step I took forward, it felt like I took a million steps back. It felt like my life was like a vase that shattered into a million pieces. And every time I tried to pick up the pieces and glue this vase back together, I just couldn't do it. The cracks kept appearing. Everyone kept saying to me, go and do mindfulness, go and do meditation. I tried all those things and none of them worked. In fact, they made me feel worse. In September 2015, the vase broke for good. I had an enormous breakdown. I was diagnosed with post-traumatic stress disorder and burnout. Frankly, I'm surprised I hung on for that long. At this point, the mask had dropped and I had to accept that I really needed help. There was no way that I could do this alone. It turns out that actually building resilience isn't a solitary pursuit, no matter how much I tried. And I remember being in front of my family and just being on my knees and saying, help me. I did get professional help, and my God, did I need it. One day, my sister took me to one side during that period of healing, and she said to me, Sharon, you've got to find your silver lining in all this. Otherwise, it's going to destroy you. And I went away and I thought about it, and I thought, God, she's right. You know, all this time I kept trying to glue that vase back together and go back to who I was beforehand, but I couldn't do that. It wasn't about bouncing back. It wasn't about trying to glue that vase back together and carefully reconstruct my life. And I realized that I needed to put that vase down, and that instead I needed to build a resilient and beautiful mosaic. Because by taking the little pieces of that vase and gluing them back together in a completely different way, reimagining myself and who I could be, I realized that by actually building a brilliant and beautiful mosaic, it was setting me free to be the person I was always meant to be. And what that mosaic gave me was flexibility, adaptability, and agility, because actually it allowed me to learn, unlearn, and learn again. And this is the cornerstone to actually building resilience. And at that time, I needed to completely learn a whole new toolkit. So I started out by studying positive psychology, becoming a coach, learning about stoicism, learning about the tools they used in the US Army, because they were the only ones I could find that were fit for purpose for dealing with enormous uncertainty and change, for actually building true resilience. And so I've realized what actually started out as a way to save myself, when I came back into the workplace for the second time with eyes wide open in a completely different way, I realized that actually as a senior leader, I needed to show up as a heart-centered leader. I needed to show up as the chief heart officer. And I needed to lead my teams with courage and with connection and with compassion. And so began this journey to actually constructing this blueprint, to actually how can we help our teams to thrive through change? How can we help our teams to actually build their own resilient mosaics? There were 5 key things I learned through this experience that have helped me and have helped hundreds of teams to build that resilient mosaic. Number 1, growth is not linear. Okay, for as many steps as you'll take forward, you'll take just as many back, maybe even more, which means we need to create learning loops in our teams so we can learn, unlearn, and learn together. The second thing to building a resilient mosaic is there's no going back, right? When we go through periods of change, we're never going to be the same again. Your team will never be the same again. So it's important we start to develop that ability in our minds and actually practice things like the what if strategy tool. The third thing to building that team resilient mosaic so your teams can thrive in change is actually learning how to grow stronger together from challenges. We can't choose the challenges that come our way, but we can choose how we rise from them. There is pain that you use and there is pain that uses you. So let's cultivate the right kind of hard in our teams. That's why I encourage leaders to try introducing things like swallowing the frog. Sounds weird, I know, but it's about doing the hardest thing first on your list. The fourth thing to building that team resilient mosaic so our teams can thrive in change is hope and optimism. They're not the same things. Hope is not wishful thinking. It's self-belief and a plan. Optimism isn't just toxic positivity. It's about having gritty optimism where we lean into the challenges that we're facing in times of change and we acknowledge we can grow. So Embrace the Suck from the US Army is a great tool to use there. And the fifth one is everyday courage. You don't have to go through crisis to show up as a courageous leader or as a courageous team. I'm talking about, having hard conversations. I'm talking about giving someone your perspective on how you think they did in a meeting. We all have the ability to show up with that everyday courage. And this is why I firmly believe we need to redefine what resilience looks like. Because resilient teams, they're the ones who stay aligned, connected, and adaptive under pressure. That's what team resilience truly means. It's not about being hard on teams. It's about creating that culture of flexibility and learning and connection. And that's what we need to focus our energy and attention on as we are living through such uncertain times. And it's why I decided to create this Resilience 2.0 model, because we need a more human approach to actually cultivating resilience in our teams so that they may be able to thrive in times of change. And it works at 3 levels: mindset, skill set, and tool set. What I'm going to take you through now is one tool you can use in each of these areas from today with your teams. So the first one is mindset. What is the mindset we need to cultivate in our teams so that they may be able to be resilient and thrive in times of change? Number 1 is gritty optimism. Gritty optimism is not denying our reality that something is hard. It's in fact leaning into it and then being able to understand how we can grow from it. So it's basically building emotional agility in us. The US Army has a tool called Embrace the Suck. I've renamed it Sitting in the Messy Middle because that's what I think we're doing here. What you're doing here is, and I'll give you an example to illustrate it. So let's say my manager keeps changing the goalposts and I feel like I'm constantly firefighting. That's naming the suckiness of a situation. Yes, suckiness is totally a word. I haven't just made it up. That's naming the suckiness of the situation. Okay, that's the gritty part. And I'm learning to be a better strategic thinker and be more patient by asking better questions and being patient during times of change. That's the optimism part. So we're not denying the reality, we're leaning into it, and we're learning how we can move forward. That cultivates emotional agility in our teams, but it also gives them agency and ownership to be able to move forward so that they don't get stuck. The second tool that we need to cultivate in teams, this is a skill set tool so that we can help teams to be more resilient in times of change, is cultivating our ability to have courageous conversations. The highest performing teams I ever work with, the most human ones, are the ones who can do this. Because when we're working in fast-paced environments and we need to move things forward, we can't be shy about speaking about things that need to change or things that we need people to hear. And so as a chief heart officer, my advice is always the same. Tough love. Tough love really works. Don't say to someone, I want to give you feedback. Say, I'd like to share with you my perspective. Nobody likes the word feedback. It makes them do this. Instead, say someone said something in a meeting, you think it hasn't landed very well and it's actually going to slow down progress. Maybe take that person to one side. I was famous in my career for the Sharon Parmar side, where I would say to someone, hey, can I share my observation with you or my perspective with you of what I just saw in that meeting? I think you're really great. And I really want everyone else to see you in that same light. Some of the things that you said in that meeting, I'm not sure they landed in the way you wanted them to. And so I just wanted to share that with you because I really want to see you succeed. Can I do that? No one's going to turn that down. Yeah, that might be tough for them to hear, but it's said with great love and a desire to help the team to succeed. And the final one is the cultural tool set. Here we're talking about what is the culture that we want to cultivate in this team so that they may be able to be resilient and thrive in times of change. And it fundamentally comes down to connection. Now, we really want to cultivate connection at every level. Let that be that actually at a team level, at an individual level, or at a project cycle, or in team meetings. We want to cultivate that connection together. One of the tools I love sharing in organizations is called the fail fika. So the fail fika is something from Spotify. So in Sweden, fika is to have coffee and cake. And in Spotify, they've introduced at the end of every project cycle, a fail fika, where they talk about the learnings and the failings of a project, and they do it over coffee and cake because everything's better over coffee and cake. And what this allows people to do is to feel safe. It allows the teams to connect with each other. It allows them to have psychological safety. It allows them to create that learning of culture. It builds trust. And fundamentally, all of these things are what actually helps teams to be resilient and thrive in times of change. The Navy SEALs have this great quote. They say, in moments of pressure, we don't rise to the occasion. We sink to the level of our training. When we prioritize courage, connection, gritty optimism in our teams, that is how we will foster a culture where these teams can thrive in times of change. And this is why we need to fundamentally revisit resilience so that you can all go forward and build your own resilient mosaics with your teams. The toughest teams I know aren't hard. They're human. And what makes them resilient is their ability to flex, not fracture, under pressure. Because we are always better together. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sharon. I think that's probably one of the best, if not the best, takes on resilience I've ever heard. Just so much in there, and I wish we had more time to talk about it. Even just going back to Wall Street and Working Girl, two absolute classic films that are a staple of my movie collection and made me fall in love with New York. And but when I was listening, it felt like you took the good from the 80s and the 90s and the early 2000s and have evolved it to make it more human. And so, because don't leave things behind, because I think certain elements to what you were just talking about just then are maybe seen as like tough love. I think some people would balk at that, but it's these are important elements, and there needs to be a blend and a balance to everything that we do in life, isn't it?
Yeah, and I think what you're hitting on here is the high performance and high heart. Yeah. And ultimately, that's what human leadership is really about. That's what being a chief heart officer is about. And I think that particularly for people who are perfectionists who think in black and white thinking, we often tend to choose an either or because we feel very comfortable with it. But actually, it is that more human element that actually, yes, there is the tough, but there's also the love. And I need you to hear this because I really want us to succeed. And I think that's one of the biggest challenges I see for leaders at the moment is getting that balance right and understanding how you deliver that. You know, with some people, you can be very direct. With others, you can't. Some people you can say things in front of a room full of people. Others, you need to take them to one side. And I think that is the real flex and understanding when you're leading a team is truly understanding the people who are involved and actually what is going to make them succeed. And I think leaders have an incredibly challenging job now.
I think the binary word you use there as well. I mean, the world has just become yes or no, you're right or wrong, and that is a challenge that we all have to try and face inside and outside of work. And I just did a really thought-provoking talk there for everybody, I'm sure. So thank you so much. I would love to, as with every storyteller we've had, I'd love to circle around and have another chat with you one-on-one and see what we could do together and get this out to the world more.
Pleasure. Love to. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you so much, Sharon. Thank you.
Thank you.